together. And that is how we convey joy, is with our eyes, looking genuinely in someone's eyes and saying, it's so good to be with you. I enjoy you. I appreciate you. So think about the garden. Think about our Father God. And you're going to call Julie?
Yeah, right now you want me to?
Yeah, you can. I'm just going to kind of, let me just say, Julie Hamilton, Dr. Julie Hamilton, she's got all these degrees. She helped write a book on sexuality and the development of our sexual being with Dr. Nicolosi, and he wrote a book called Attachment, Shame, Pain, and Attachment, Shame and Attachment Pain. And so she was his assistant, and together they started this foundation and did all this research on how do we get our sexuality. So Dr. Julie Hamilton is going to be online with us just momentarily. She's written a lot of books, and you're going to be able to ask her some questions, and she's going to talk to us about the same things we've been saying, which is really fun. Do you remember how we talked about the ruler portion of the Spirit? How many of you know that you have a ruler portion of your spirit? Day 6 of creation. The ruler portion of your spirit is the subject of this book, Loving Your Kids on Purpose by Danny Silk. And how do we give our children that sense that they rule and reign over their own life, and that the ruling and reigning is coming from inside, a choice that they get to make. Many of us were raised in homes where there was external control only, and we associate love with control and fear. And that's not how God was. Think about God in the garden. First thing he did was put 2 trees in the garden. I mean, he surrounded them with all this beauty. He surrounded them with goodness and kindness, and they had choices though. God gave them a choice, and he was right there with them when they made the other choice. I mean, he wasn't far away. We get to do the same thing as we extend freedom to our children to make a choice. And then they get to have the consequences of that. So love always, always, always protects. And when you're teaching your child how to be respectful and how to respond with his own internal choice, we're teaching them how to protect us, the relationship. So when your child makes a very great respectful decision and treats you with kindness, you can say, thank you for protecting us. Can you think about that? Thank you for protecting us, because you're protecting it. Or your spouse is speaking to you, or you see your friend treating you with great kindness and respect. You can just look them in the eyes and say, thank you for protecting our friendship. Thank you for protecting us. I really appreciate that honor and that respect. And we live in a culture with a lot of dishonor and disrespect. Welcome, Julie Hamilton. Can you hear me? Look at that smile. Yay, she's beautiful too. Yay. So Dr. Julie Hamilton is here sharing with us, and we've been talking about the portions of our spirit, developing all the portions of our spirit. And we're coming, today we're going to spend a lot of time talking about intimacy and connection, which is the theme of mercy, the mercy portion, 7th day of creation. Think about Sabbath, rest, 7th day of creation. It's only when you rest and you slow down can you connect, right? So connection and intimacy are the theme of the Sabbath. Intimacy with the Father, intimacy with one another. And that intimate connection has to be elevated. That relationship is the most important thing of all. So Julie is an expert on bonding and attachment and all manner of how do we through Jesus. She's a Christian dynamo, and she speaks to colleges and schools all over the country, and I told them about the books you've written and your degrees and all that. But Julie, what would you say about what's a word to parents? What do you want to just start us out with a how do you think that parents should effectively attach and bond with their children? What do you have to say about that?
Okay. Well, yes. That's one of my favorite things to talk about is the power of connecting with children. I believe we were made to be connected with God, ourselves, and one another. He made us relational, and He places babies in families where they will be nurtured by a mother and a father who will then set the stage for how that child will learn to relate to their Heavenly Father. So it's the baby learns through the relationship with the mother and the father, and it starts, of course, with the mother. The mother's the first one to carry the baby, the mother is the source of food, the mother's the first attachment figure, and the father plays an important role as well as time goes on, especially. But yes, it's through the relationship that a child has with the parents that the child learns what it is to have a Heavenly Father, to be loved and to be nurtured and to be cared for by a Heavenly Father. And so you want me to keep going or?
Yeah, you can. I'll tell you, do you have anything to say about attachment when the baby's nursing or anything like that? Looking at the baby or?
Oh, just the importance of eye contact and with the baby learns from the mother, self-regulation as the mother is responsive to the baby's emotional states. The baby learns how to soothe, as the mother calms and soothes the baby begins to learn how to do that, and that the attachment between the mother and the infants really does set the stage for the baby's emotional development. And so, yeah, that's such an important stage.
Mm-hmm. For trust to be built.
Yes, definitely. Trust and security, belonging, all of that is, formed the early months and onward. Mm-hmm. So.
Do you want to talk about shame and attachment loss at all?
And I talk about it, a little bit differently. You want me to?
You go for it. You just go for it.
Okay.
Share what's in your heart.
Okay. So one of the things I do talk about a lot is gender identity and how the relationships between the child and the parents contribute to the formation of a secure gender identity. And so we hear a lot about gender identity at this time in our culture. And really what I've found is that the messages that are given in our culture right now, particularly about that issue, well, of course about many issues, but when it comes to the issue of gender identity and even that's tied in a little bit with homosexuality, the messages are contrary to Scripture. And so I like to look at what does the Bible say, and then also look at what do we know from the science, and then how do parents play a role. So what's going on right now in our culture is that we hear messages that gender doesn't matter. It's just a state of mind. If a little boy wants to be a girl, we should let him be a girl. Or if a little girl wants to be a boy, we should let her be a boy. That it doesn't really matter. There's no difference. And some of the things that are happening in my field are really alarming. The way, there used to be something in my field, there was we use a manual for diagnosing problems, and there was a diagnosis called gender identity disorder. So if a child was confused about their gender, it was considered a disorder, and as a therapist, you would help them become more comfortable being who God made them to be, the boy or the girl that God made them to be. Well, in the last few years, that diagnosis was changed to something that they now call gender dysphoria. And the idea with that is, it's not a disorder. If a boy wants to be a girl or a girl wants to be a boy, there's nothing wrong with them. It's just that it might be stressful to them. So now, in my field, they treat the stress, not the actual issue. And the way that you would deal with this child, according to the mental health professionals, would be help that little boy become a girl. You could let that boy start wearing a dress, let him be called by a girl's name, and then by the age of 9 or 10, he could start taking puberty-suppressing hormones to stop him from going into puberty. And then after the time when puberty would begin, he could take opposite sex hormones to actually become a girl. That's the treatment that's recommended. And it's almost like we're living in such a bizarre almost like the Twilight Zone to me. And in some states, and in some counties, they have even made it illegal for therapists to help a little boy be a boy, to be secure as the boy that God made him to be. We are, not allowed to help him. And that's actually true in my county right now, that if a little boy wanted to be a girl, I'm not allowed to help him be confident as the boy God made him to be. So that has kind of led me to really want to educate parents on what they can do to raise children with a secure gender identity. Since we're not allowed to help the children that are confused, maybe we can help the parents prevent some of this confusion in the first place. And so that's one of the things I'd love to talk about. So I have a lot that I can keep going with that if you want.
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so I do want to, I love this scripture. When I talk about this issue of gender identity or homosexuality, I love approaching it from a position of grace as described in Colossians 3:12 through 14. So I want to approach it with this in mind. It says, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. It's so frustrating when we hear bad messages in our culture, messages that are damaging to children. But yet I want to keep this in mind that there are people that are hurting. We want to approach all these topics with compassion and kindness and humility and gentleness and patience. It goes on to say, bear with each other and forgive whatever grievances you may have against one another. Forgive as the Lord forgave you, and over all these virtues put on which binds them together in perfect unity. So looking at it and keeping that in mind, so if we look at the specific issue of gender identity, before I get into what parents can do, I just want to be very clear on what Scripture says, because it's the opposite of what we're hearing in our culture. And so, first of all, the culture is saying gender doesn't matter. It does matter. It matters hugely to God. In the story of creation in Genesis 1:27, when in the description of God creating humans, there's actually only two things he mentions. It says that Genesis 1:27, he created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So it says we're made in his image and we're male or female. And as God's image bearers, we reflect who he is. And it matters. The gender, the biological sex that he designed for us to be does matter. It matters in how we reflect who he is. Being who he meant for us to be then mirrors and brings glory to God. And so it says clearly there are two options. We're male or we're female. And it's very important. The other thing that's so significant and exciting about gender is that God designed for male and female to come together as two opposites who are complementary. Men and women bring different things to the equation. And of course, through male and female relations, life is produced. So amazing, really. But beyond that, it's God designed marriage to reflect the relationship we have with our Heavenly Father. A marriage between a man and a woman symbolizes the relationship of Christ to the church. Am I frozen?
No, just for a moment you were. I'm so sorry.
Okay, that's okay. Can you hear me good?
Yeah, I think we can hear you.
So,
good.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we're good. We got that.
Okay. So the relationship between a husband and a wife symbolizes the relationship that Christ and the church have, which is the most wonderful. Our relationship with our Heavenly Father is the most important relationship of all. And so marriage is such a sacred symbol of that. And that's not really to be messed with. Changing and altering that is very serious. And then the Bible goes on to talk about, what marriage is and that it produces life and it's the foundation of the family. So gender does matter to God. It matters hugely. The other thing, of course, as Christians, we know that God has a plan for us and he wants us to walk in his plan, not according to our flesh, but according to his call for our lives. And so when our desires are in conflict with either who God made us to be or how God wants us to live, he calls us to surrender those desires. And the good news is he gives us his Holy Spirit to equip us and empower us to live the way he wants us to live. So it's not a matter of, well, I feel this way, so this is who I am, or I feel this way, so this is what I must do. It's, well, I have these feelings, but I have the power of the Holy Spirit in me to live according to God's plan, not according to my own flesh. So that's an important message that we don't really hear in the culture. The culture kind of has it backwards, and I think children growing up today are just being told such wrong things. They're being told that whatever you feel like you should do, or if you feel like you're a girl, then be a girl. And even the notion that a boy could become a girl is a lie. You know, even through hormones or surgery, that won't change the DNA. God has stamped that in really in every cell of the body are chromosomes that are male or female. And so even when children take hormones or they have surgery, it doesn't really change their biological sex that God designed. And so they're being misled, and they're being led down a harmful path. In fact, just from the science, we know, first of all, there's no evidence whatsoever that people are born homosexual or that people are born in the wrong body. The researchers have tried to prove that homosexuality is an inborn condition. They have never been able to prove that. There's no evidence of that. And certainly there's no evidence that children are born in the wrong body. We do have evidence that the treatments that are being offered are harmful to children. We know that the suicide rate for transgender people who have transitioned is much, much higher than the population. We know that there are many problems with the way that the culture is saying to deal with these problems. And so we know God's ways are always best, and science always backs that up. So I wanted to talk specifically about how parents can play a role. But first I want to explain how gender identity gets formed in a person's life. Because there are children that are genuinely confused about their gender. And for some children, confusion will eventually lead to homosexual attractions later in life. For some children outgrow gender confusion. Some children grow up no longer wanting to be the opposite sex, but the gender confusion becomes more of a homosexual attraction later. And then there are some children who the gender confusion will persist. A small percentage of them will continue to want to be the opposite sex. So how does gender identity get formed? Let's talk. First, I'd love to share how it gets formed in a healthy way, and then go back and explain some of the things that could go wrong in the development of gender identity that could lead to confusion or homosexual attractions later. So, as Nancy was saying, when babies are born, the first attachment figure is the mother. So I'm going to explain, first of all, I'm going to explain male development, and then I'll go back and explain female development. But for a baby boy, the first person he is to bond with is the mother. And so the baby bonds with the mother, and then around the age of 1.5 to 3 years old, in that little window of time, some call this the gender identification phase. And so in that window of time, a little boy, well, let me say this, between 1.5 and 3 or 4 is when all children start to realize there's a difference between boys and girls, and they begin to want to know more and understand more about who they are in terms of their gender. So a little boy during that time will begin to gravitate towards the father, and he will look to the father to want to know who he is as a boy. So he's going to be curious, what are boys like? How do they walk and talk, and how do they act? And who am I as a boy? And so that little boy is going to look to his dad, and it's through the relationship with the father that the little boy will get his questions answered. It's when the father is spending time with him, showing interest in him, verbally affirming him, being physically affectionate with him, and playful, and wrestling, and interacting with him in all those ways. So little by little, through the relationship with the father, the boy begins to understand what it means to be a boy. Well, then, around the age of 5 years old or so, children start school, and at around that age, peer involvement becomes important. So now a little boy is going to look to other peers, male peers, other boys at school, to understand who he is and what it means to be a boy. And so he'll look to the other boys and he'll want to know, do I fit in? Am I like them? Do they like me? Am I accepted by them? And little by little, he'll learn what it means to be a boy through the relationships he has with the boys that he plays with. Well, by the time this little boy reaches puberty, he will have had a good many years of bonding with the same sex, and it's in puberty that he becomes interested in and even attracted to the opposite sex. So now for the child that develops gender insecurity or homosexual attractions, that process doesn't happen. So I'll pause for a minute, and then I can explain what happens in the development of a gender identity that would lead to confusion or homosexual attraction. And go ahead.
Well, when we talked, we were talking about how important it is for a little boy. What happens when a little boy sees a daddy that's angry and harsh? You know, when the child, or a mom that's not relationally connected. Oh, you know what? Can somebody shut that back? Thank you so much. So anyway, I mean, just going back to the importance of for there to be a healthy identity, period. We've got to stay connected to the Lord, who's the God of patience and love and kindness and gentleness. And if a child doesn't have that role model that's kind and patient and gentle and loving, then what do we have then?
Yes, and I love all of this stuff that you've been talking about, Nancy, the going slow and connecting and being present with your children. It's so important, and it does set the stage. In fact, I want to say a little more about that too. But first I'll explain then, just as you're saying, what happens for a child who will end up developing either gender insecurity or homosexual attractions later. Typically, there can either be something that maybe breaks the attachment with the mother, either, if the mother's not present and available, maybe she's depressed or hospitalized or something breaks that attachment. That can be one factor that can kind of derail a child from developing a secure gender identity. But then the next thing that happens during that stage of 1.5 to 3, if the child the boy, let's say, for example, the boy looks to connect with the dad, and if the dad is not available, and this can happen for a number of reasons. I do know loving fathers who want to be available, but maybe their child doesn't perceive that they're available. So perceptions are an important thing here. So it's not to place blame on parents, but how a child perceives what happens makes all the difference in the world. So if the child perceives that the dad maybe the dad works a lot, and the child perceives that as, my dad doesn't want to play with me. He doesn't like me because I'm not worth it. So typically perceptions are influenced by our temperament. So what we often see with children who develop gender insecurity or homosexual attractions later is they often a sensitive temperament. So these children are often very observant, very smart. They're paying attention to every little thing, and they soak everything in. These are the kids who really take everything to heart, and they take it in at a deep level. So those types of children that are really sensitive, they might feel rejected even if rejection isn't meant. Whereas if you have a child who's not quite as sensitive, that child might not even notice that, the little things that the sensitive child is noticing.
Julie, let me jump in here. That sensitive child that she described just now, the one that is very observant and deeply feels things, that would be a mercy, a child that is a mercy. Our mercy children who have that they're just designed by God. They're born with a strong mercy anointing, and they're gifted and skilled to help us connect, with God and people. But they're deeply sensitive, and they're permeable. They can walk in a room and feel who's out of sorts, or they'll walk in a room and feel the anger or the gladness or whatever. They're feelers, and that we've got to understand and live with ourselves and each other according to understanding. So if you've got a child that's a mercy, they're going to want affection. They want connection and touch. And so many times if a little boy just wants connection and touch, he might be pushed away, like, oh son, come on, let's go hunting, or whatever, son, why aren't you out? Let's throw the ball together. And that doesn't meet the need of that little boy at all, to throw the ball. No, I want to be held, Dad. So, yeah, like John the disciple leaned on Jesus. He was a mercy. He was touching, leaning, John the beloved. So that's what we're talking about.
Yes, I'm so glad you said that. That's such a good description. And those children will also, because they are such deep feelers, I like how you said they walk in the room and they can feel the emotions of the room. They will sometimes feel rejected and hurt over things that the parent might think wouldn't be at all, aren't intended to be rejecting. And so these children will often perceive things that you may not even realize. And so the ones that will end up, we have found that the ones that end up with a homosexual orientation later or even gender confusion, often they have that temperament. They are that mercy, the type that you're describing, and so they're getting hurt by subtle things, and they're taking those experiences to heart and perceiving them as rejection. And so a little boy during this period of time between 1.5 and 3 or 4, when he's wanting to attach to the dad, if he perceives rejection, if the dad is too busy, if the dad is maybe a little bit harsh, or if the dad and the mom are fighting, the boy might think the dad is mean and he doesn't want to be like the dad, he doesn't want to be close to the dad, the boy might feel protective of the mother. If the dad is harsh with his words toward the son or gets loud when he's angry, all of those things could scare this type of child, this sensitive child. And that child, what will happen is that child will stay connected to the mother. Now I'm talking about the one that ends up with homosexual attractions later. Usually during this window of time, it's kind of like they'll inwardly say, okay, fine, if you're rejecting me, then I'm rejecting you and everything that you represent, which is masculinity. And they put up a wall against the dad because it's self-protection. They're protecting themselves because they feel rejected. And they then stay connected to the mom. Instead of moving into close relationship with the dad, they stay close to the mom. And usually these kids are also surrounded by other women in their lives. So they might have a grandmother, an aunt, sisters, lots of women contributing into their lives, and what they absorb is feminine input instead of masculine input. At a time when they're craving male love, they're craving that closeness with their father, they end up soaking in female love and femininity instead of masculinity. So for that child, when they are about 5 years old, when it's time to then bond with male peers, they'll often have a hard time doing that. Either because they're uncomfortable with males because they've been surrounded by women, they've soaked in femininity, they have the perception that being masculine is not either it's not safe or they're not cut out for it. If they have felt rejected by the father, they might think something's wrong with me. I don't have what it takes to exist in the male world. My dad doesn't really want to spend time with me, or I'm scared, of the masculine. So they have negative views of masculinity, and it's very hard to then bond and want to play with other boys. But the other thing is, oftentimes if they have acquired femininity, other kids at school might not accept them. Sadly, they might be called names, sissy, and not included with other boys. And so those boys will end up spending their elementary school years with girls. Now, during those elementary years, usually kids want to play with the same sex, not the opposite sex. That's how God designed us. That, boys think girls have cooties, no girls allowed. That's because it's a God-given stage of development that we need same-sex bonding to learn who we are before we can become interested in the opposite sex. So during this crucial stage of these elementary years, when a boy is craving love from his father, he's craving acceptance from male peers, so he's desiring same-sex love and acceptance, but he's not getting it. He's instead playing with girls during that time. He's soaking in femininity. And that craving for male love and acceptance doesn't go away. It's almost as if that craving intensifies and even takes on another form. So by the time he reaches puberty, where he's developing sexual feelings, that craving for love begins to be a sexual craving. And so it's not because he was born gay, it's because he desired male love and the needs weren't met. That God-given need for same-sex love and connection didn't happen, and now it's a sexualized craving for him. Does all of that make sense?
Are there any questions or comments so far?
I have a question.
Okay, Elaine's got a
Is
question.
it similar for girls? What's the difference between girls and boys? She mentioned boys.
Okay, good question. Okay, so with girls, there are some girls that follow that path that I just described, that during that crucial time, 1.5 to 3 or 4, they are supposed to stay connected to the mother in order to soak in femininity and understand who they are as female. For some of these girls, there's a break. Either, like I said, maybe the mother's depressed, or the mother is busy, or for some girls, they may perceive the mother in a negative way. Like if a mother and father are fighting, and they may perceive the mother as weak, or some girls perceive their mother as too emotional. And so for whatever reason, they have a perception of femininity that's not desirable. And so for some of these girls, they think, ooh, if that's what it means to be feminine, I don't want that. If it means to be weak or be a victim or be overly emotional. So they detach, they don't stay connected with the mother in the way that they should. And by the way, what it should be is looking up to the mother, like, oh, that's who I want to be like. She's a woman. I want to be like her. I admire her. I respect her. I want to be like her. So if something happens that prevents them from staying in close relationship with the mother and desiring to be like her, and so those girls then will instead attach to a male, usually either a father or an older brother or some male figure, and acquire more of masculine input in their lives. That's one pathway for women who end up with gender confusion or homosexual attractions later. Another pathway is certainly sexual abuse can affect a child, either boy or girl, in a very profound way. And so some kids may have the development, the milestones met with the parents, but experience sexual abuse. And that will certainly create confusion. Both sexual abuse and pornography exposure can derail a child in their gender identity development, and eventually could lead to homosexual attractions. And then another thing for girls, right now it's kind of popular to say that you're bisexual or transgender. So you see some girls in high school, middle school, high school, even college, where they didn't have exactly the pathway that I'm describing, but it's more culturally induced. So their friends are saying they're transgender, or it's popular as a way to get attention. It's kind of more, they're influenced by the culture. So you do see girls that they really didn't have this problem early on in childhood, but it crops up in adolescence or the teen years or even in college. So that's another pathway for girls. It can be a little bit trendy. And again, that would just apply to the ones that did not have it in childhood. If girls were showing signs from the age of 3, 4, 5 years old of not being comfortable with their gender, then it's probably more developmentally, it's more of a developmental thing. But if a girl just suddenly, there's a kind of a new phenomenon that's happening with the transgender issue, where girls are just suddenly saying they're transgender, but they really had no history of that before, more of a culturally induced thing.
And I don't know if you want to address.
Too, but all of us want power. We do want to share control. In other words, so as a parent is respectful and courteous and giving a child a choice, as would you like, you're going to do this and you're not going to do this. But if a child perceives that they have no power, and they see, an overbearing parent, whether it's an overbearing mom or dad, with all the control and power, that strips them of their dignity and their God-designed voice and their yes and their no muscle, then
We've got a mutual friend that said, I want
nothing to do with women, because she saw her mom having no power and the dad being, oppressive and domineering. So she grew up absolutely saying, I'm not being a woman, women get beaten up. I mean, I'm not going to be, I'm not going to be feminine. That's you're going to get beaten up or used if you're a woman. So I'll be a man. So.
That's right, exactly. And see, what happens though in childhood, if you're not embracing who God made you to be, so a little girl who's detaching from who she really is as a female, that becomes a void later. And so she became attracted to the missing part of herself. She became attracted to women and embraced a lesbian identity because she was detached from herself, detached from femininity, detached from who God really made her to be. And so that's what happens with these girls. They end up being attracted to what was missing inside of themselves. So yeah, and so boys and girls are a little bit more complex, so there can be a few different variables with girls than with boys, but yeah, the development is so important. So, and I have some ideas about what we can do to prevent this kind of confusion, if you want me to go into that when you're ready.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Oh, got a couple of questions. Okay, Holly first and then Misty. You want to say it really loudly?
Yeah, just wondering, what happens if a child doesn't get the first year of nurturing, like if they're in an orphanage or something? How does that affect, or is that a totally different area?
Did you say in
She
an
said,
orphanage?
what if a child, their first year was spent in an orphanage and they had no attachment and no, touching and affection?
Yeah, so, there are studies of children that did not receive nurture and care in orphanages, and it can have a profound effect to varying degrees. So children need that nurture and that bonding. I mean, there were some extreme cases where children actually died for lack of being held until they were fed. They were in orphanages where they were fed and provided shelter, but they were not loved, held, nurtured, and they actually died, and it was called failure to thrive. That's in a much more extreme example. But I know many families adopt from hard backgrounds, and connection can still happen, and healing can occur. There's a wonderful, there's a woman who, Empowered to Connect, that's the website. EmpoweredToConnect.com is a woman who specialized in adopted children, or she called them children from hard places, and she talked about Nancy Purvis, and she has since passed away, but she still has wonderful material available. But she talked about how the connection even later, so you adopt a child from a hard place, a difficult background, and you can begin to connect and bring healing to those places of that child's heart and brain. And so, I think she's got some great information and done a wonderful, research, and talks about that. EmpoweredToConnect.com is her website. But connecting later, when the child is in a home and the connection can begin, that can be restorative and can be healing to varying degrees.
Okay, now Miss.
Got a question for you.
Yes. What about the spiritual aspect? Say a child is in a family line that's had homosexuality for several generations in a row. Does that play an effect to any of this currently?
So the spiritual, come on up, Misty, yeah.
Yeah, have him go behind the mic to ask.
Yeah, okay, here we go, come over here.
The spiritual aspect, like if a child comes from a family line that has several generations of homosexuality in it, does that play into anything that you currently study?
That's a good question, and that is I have not looked at research on that, or any of the data behind that, and I don't know, Nancy, if you want to speak to that, but that I can't answer. Sorry.
Well, we know that we have generational DNA. Physically, spiritually, it passes down. So, I could have a genetic marker for varicose veins or for anything that passes down. You could be from great-great-great-grandmother. Even fears, fear of spiders, fear of something. So I think that certainly that confusion and all of that, because it's such a deeper issue, the issues of choosing homosexuality and lesbianism and all that is attached. It's a much more complex issue than just it's deeply complex, and it is, I think, that is past. Let's just say a family that just doesn't touch. They're not affectionate with each other. They're not slow down. They don't know how to connect with God. They don't even have a sense of love, because they never are able to slow down and receive love. They just always have to be working. Performance is the high. Working. We're good Germans. We keep our house clean. Whatever the identity is, that this is who we are, and we work. And so then they're not stopping to slow down and connect and hold each other and be affectionate. How healing is it just right here in this room with us as we hold each other and touch each other? Isn't that so healing? We always need, as adults, we need to be held in touch. So definitely, I'm sure there's generational spiritual impact there. It's
And that
significant.
That leads to, can I go ahead?
No, go ahead.
Okay, that actually leads to the next thing that I was going to share, and that is just what we can do to equip children to have a secure gender identity and to prevent some of this confusion, especially when children are young, but even for older children. And so I think of it as connecting and directing. So when I think of parenting, I think about that parenting involves kind of a twofold approach, the one I call connecting and the other one directing. And so the directing has to do with the teaching and the equipping and the training, but the directing has to be rooted in the connecting, which is the nurture, the emotional nurture, the relationship. So I'd love to share a few points on that if I could. Okay, so with connecting, so connecting has to come first. The Bible says, and I think again about, I think Nancy, you've talked about this, that the way we parent our children is modeled after how God parents us. So we have a Heavenly Father who sets the perfect example of how we can be a parent. And the Bible says that we love Him because He first loved us. The Bible also says, if you love me, you'll obey my commandments. So it's the context of love that we as parents love our children and then they love in return. And because they love, they'll obey. But we have to create the context of love. We have to start with the relationship. I like what Josh McDowell used to say. He used to say, rules without relationship equals rebellion, leads to rebellion. So the idea is it all starts in the connecting. It starts in the relationship. So when I think about connecting, I think of several things. So the first thing I have numbered points if anyone's taking notes. But the first thing that is important for connecting is time. And Nancy, I love what your material on this is so right on. I mean, I love it. Even for me as a parent, I love to hear what you're saying about the time with children unrushed. So the first point is time. They say that old saying, how does a child spell love? T-I-M-E, right? You've probably heard that before. How does a child spell love? T-I-M-E, time. Time is how they feel loved. And so when I think about time, I think it's one of the most important gifts we can give our children. And underneath time, I have 3 points. Number one, time that is free from hurry, which you have covered so well, but it's so true. And we need to hear it over and over because in our culture, we move at a fast pace. We cram a lot in and we overschedule ourselves. So we need to hear that again and again, that time with our children should be free from hurry, not rushed. And that's a goal of mine as well. And then the next point underneath time, letter B, would be time is undivided. In this world of technology, I have real concerns about what that's doing, not only to our brains. I do think with technology where we have data coming at us, we can be texting and emailing and Twitter, all these things, it creates an ADD type of brain, where we begin to need that constant input to stay stimulated, but it also hurts our relationships. Mm-hmm. They actually have found that there's so many things that are happening because of technology, but one of them is that people don't go as deep in conversation when there's the presence of a cell phone because they anticipate that they could be interrupted. Right. Even if the phone is just sitting on the table.
Can you relate to that?
It's because you kind of anticipate, well, I might get interrupted at any minute. And so unconsciously, you just know not to go as deep in conversation. So for children, when we have our phones out and we are with them, that is a reminder to them that we could be distracted at any minute and we might be getting a call or we might be getting a text. And so I encourage parents to keep the phone. My husband and I try to keep our phone in the laundry room so that our goal is that they not even see us on our phones when we're with them, because for a number of reasons. Number one, I don't want them to want a phone and to think that that's a big deal to have a phone. But also, most importantly, I don't want it to distract from the time that we're together. And so it's a hard thing to do, though, because as a culture, we've kind of become accustomed to our phone being kind of our lifeline, or our computer, whatever it is. So, but anyway, I do challenge parents to try to have time that's undivided, even if it's just a meal time or story time together, even if it's just a chunk of time where the phone is away, the volume is off, and it's just undivided time. It's so, so important because I don't think we get enough of that nowadays. And then the third thing with time is that we need time that's ongoing, so we do need regular contact. I know some families where they work a lot, the mom and the dad, they work all the time, and they try to make up for it by taking a really amazing vacation, when it's vacation time. And I understand people are busy and sometimes both parents might have to work. I think sometimes we think we have to work more than we actually do have to work. But with that said, whatever the schedule, it's important to have ongoing time. So daily contact with our children, and regular, because things are happening in their lives and we can't just catch up at Christmas time or in the summers. We need to have regular ongoing time with them throughout, at least each day. And
We
go ahead.
have, I think that everybody has heard me say, quiet together.
It's a brain skill that we all have to have every single day. We need to have put on a quiet worship song. Let's all pile on the couch together. Let's hold each other, stroking, foot rubbing, whatever we're doing. But let's touch and connect in a quiet way for about 3 to 5 minutes. And then after that, then you can talk about it. Okay, what did you sense, or what do we need to release? Is there anything that happened today that we need to talk about together? Is there what came up in your heart? What did God say to you while we were having quiet together? And so that quiet together every day. We need that in our homes.
I love that. That's good. Yes, that's so good. Oh, yes. Okay, and so then, I heard, we all know the wonderful verse, Psalm 46:10, be still and know that I am God. We need to be still to hear from Him. And I think you covered this in talking about the Sabbath and that mercy. So we need to be still, and then that fits in exactly what you're saying, relationally, being still and being together. So relationally connecting. And then someone said, I think it's been attributed to Corrie ten Boom. I don't know if they know for sure who said it, but I believe it was her. That if the devil can't make you bad, he'll make you busy. I don't know if you all have heard that before, but that, if for those of us who may not be tempted by major vices, busyness is the thing that will keep us from being our best and being who God made us to be and being with Him and being with family. So busyness can be us.
Right, because we don't see each other accurately when we're flying through life.
Yes.
We're not taking time to hear really well. You know in your brain you have relational circuits, and if you're in your high function mode, then your emotion is probably not up, and it's through our emotion to the right brain that we connect. The relational circuitry to connect and listen well is all right brain. But if you're super high function left brain, then things have to happen, and you may as well not even try to resolve a conflict with somebody who's in high function left brain. It's useless. And if your child is angry and pitching a fit at you, then they're operating out of their amygdala. They're operating out of fight or flight, and they're not going to be able to get their relational circuits on. So I just think a really great thing to do to help us just restore these relational circuitries is to stop pulling together and say, we're just going to have a quiet. For us, I always put on a song, something really quiet and soothing. It can be soft guitar music, or it be something that brings you up, that just lifts you up into a heavenly realm. And so you begin to get your heart back on. And then you can have your conversation and say, now, what happened? And ask those wonderful, good questions that we need to ask of, why did you think it was okay to hit your sister? Or those asking, exploring the questions, so that they can get to know their heart. Because when they do those ugly little bad, naughty things, it's time for us to ask questions and find out, because we're helping them discover their own motivations and their own heart. But again, that takes time. It takes effort and time to go slowly and not just say, you hit your sister, go to your room.
So
That actually leads to another one of my points. So under connecting, so we have number one, time. Number two, listening to understand. So really seeking to tune into the heart of the child. Because sometimes as parents, we do get in teacher mode. But connecting requires us to tune in to their heart and understand where they're coming from. I like the saying, seek first to understand, then be understood. So we do have a lot to teach our children, but if we think, okay, let me seek first to understand, then be understood. Let me understand where he's coming from, and then I'll if there needs to be correction or if there needs to be instruction or teaching, I'll do that. But let me first tune in to understand. And by the way, this works great in all relationships, including marriage. The Bible says, James 1:19 says, be slow to speak, quick to listen, slow to becoming angry. So if we tune in and try to hear where the other person is coming from first, we'll have a chance to share our perspective. But if we can suspend our perspective and tune in to understand, what are you feeling? What is going on? Tell me your perspective. Let me try to understand where you're coming from. Oftentimes, that is so powerful and therapeutic.
Yes, yes. It's so good to be heard.
Isn't it? I would just love to be heard.
Yes, exactly. In fact, that's in Proverbs 18:13 that says, if one gives an answer before he hears, it is his folly and his shame. So if we're quick to rush to answer before hearing, it really is to our folly and our shame. So I think that's really interesting. That's Proverbs 18:13. Should I keep going? Okay, so with connecting, so we have taking the time, and I mentioned time that is free from hurry, time that's undivided, time that's ongoing. And then we have number two, listening to understand, really tuning into their perspective. Number three is emotional nurture. And that would include, under emotional nurture, I would say eye contact. You know, it's so easy to go through a day, not even making, I'm in the car with my kids, I'm talking to them, I'm talking while I'm making dinner, we're talking while we're outside walking the dog. But to stop and actually make eye contact, you could go a whole day and not actually make eye contact. But it is so important. That's how we communicate love. And it's all these things that you're talking about, this time of being still together. So it's interesting, I sometimes tell parents, just do a little experiment and look for opportunities to make eye contact. I think you'll be surprised that it doesn't happen as often as you think it would happen, unless we're intentional about it. So being intentional about eye contact. And so anyway, emotional nurture takes place.
And I've got a question. What if you have somebody in your life that does the gaze avert? They actually won't look at you.
Oh, yes.
What does that tell you about their heart? What does that tell you about their heart? If they just won't look at you, they avert their gaze.
Yeah. And for some kids, maybe not comfortable, or people maybe not comfortable because not being used to having that type of deep connection early on. Yes, yeah. So, and then the other thing with emotional nurture, so there's eye contact and then affection. And I think you've covered affection so well, Nancy. There are people who grow up without affection, and so they become parents who really just aren't comfortable with affection. But I always encourage parents to try to push beyond their comfort zone, because even if you're not comfortable with it, kids need it. And I know you've already covered this, so I won't spend a lot of time on it other than to say, I do get it that some people, if you grew up without affection, for some people it's painful physical touch can be just so outside their comfort zone. But I always encourage people to pray for God to help you overcome that, because it is important. Even if it's not comfortable, it's still important to children. And in marriage, that's also an important thing. And then the third thing with emotional nurture, we have eye contact, affection, and then affirmation. Mm-hmm. So parents are like mirrors to our children. So our children look to us as if they're looking in a mirror to know what they're like. We look in a mirror to see what we look like. Children look to parents to know, am I smart? Am I lovable? Do I have value? Am I pretty? What am I? Who am I? And it's so important that as parents, we mirror back an accurate message. Right. So an accurate message is, that we know we are made in God's image. We are of great value and worth. We are deeply loved. We have a place of belonging. Children need to hear that. They need to know they're special, they're loved, they're made in God's image. He has a purpose and a plan. They need that kind of feedback. You know, I talk to parents about giving feedback about who their children are and what they do. So who they are and what they do. Who they are is all that I was just describing. You're made in God's image. You're special. You're loved. You're precious to me. I can't imagine my life without you. And then what they do, they need specific feedback. Wow, you're so good at baseball. Oh, look at how good you are at this and that. And you know, you reminded me, I often start with, before we can even talk about the connecting and the directing that parents do, it's the parent being aligned with, in close relationship with the Lord, because He's the foundation. And that's exactly where we get the ability to parent well, is in that relationship with God. That's right, keeping our eyes on Him and maintaining that close fellowship with Him, that ongoing communication and closeness with Him.
Yes.
So I have one more point under connecting, my last point. So I just mentioned about emotional nurture, which includes eye contact, affection, affirmation, so verbally affirming. Well, let me just say before I leave this point, the verbally affirming, some people are not expressive that way. And as just like with affection, if you don't grow up having a lot of verbal feedback, you may not be comfortable giving that type of feedback. But I do believe as parents, we are to challenge ourselves to grow. With God's help, He wants to make us more than we really are and bring us outside of our limitations or our comfort zone to be able to meet the needs of our children. So even if you're not a parent who likes to express, you know, I've had parents say, oh, I'm just not that, warm and fuzzy or whatever. But we can grow in those areas, and children need to hear feedback. They need to hear that from us. Even if we're not comfortable, we need to be able to stretch in that area.
It's like water to the soul.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, we wouldn't withhold water from our child, would we? And
That's right.
Most of us are used to being kind of dehydrated physically. We kind of live a little more dehydrated than we should, and I think even dehydrated emotionally. You know, so.
Yes. And the Bible says that the tongue has the power of life and death. I mean, we can speak life into our children, or we can speak hurtful things too. But yes, it's so powerful. We want to speak life into them. That's a good way to think of it, about being dehydrated. Yeah. So the last point with connecting is empathy. And so when I think about that, there's two things. Number one, we need to join with them emotionally. So I was saying before about really tuning into their perspective. When we tune into their perspective, we then should validate their feelings, join with them emotionally. And so there's a great verse, Romans 12:15, that says, rejoice with those that rejoice and weep with those that weep. So joining with them emotionally, when I say that, I think about enter in. If they're excited, enter in and get excited with them. If they're feeling sad, enter in and hurt with them. You know, as parents, I think we want to quickly cheer, we kind of want to fix things. We rush to cheer them up. But it's so important. The Bible says, rejoice with those that rejoice and weep with those that weep. So we need to take the time to enter in before we try to pull them out of what they're going through. And that sort of ties in with the next thing. So under empathy, I have joining with them emotionally and then validating their feelings. There's actually, and like I said, I think as parents, we want them to feel better. So we might say, oh, it's not that big of a deal. Come on, look on the bright side. God's got it. Everything works together for good. Sometimes we invalidate feelings by trying to cheer our children up too quickly or trying to move them on. And instead, we need to join with them. You know, there's a great verse. It's Proverbs 25:20 that says, whoever sings songs to a heavy heart. So if we're singing songs to a heavy heart, so someone's down and we're saying, cheer up, it's not that bad, look on the bright side. Whoever sings songs to a heavy heart is like one who takes off a garment on a cold day. So imagine it's cold out and we take away their coat. It leaves them freezing. When we try to cheer them up too quickly rather than enter into their pain and just hurt with them, it's like taking away their garment on a cold day. Or it goes on to say, or like vinegar poured on soda. It has a sizzling effect. So, and I think this is true with couples as well, and friendships. You know, if we too quickly rush over someone's feelings in an attempt, sometimes it's well-meaning. We want to cheer them up. We want them to look on the bright side. We want to move them on. But sometimes what we do is we leave them feeling cold, or we leave them with that sizzling effect. It's not helpful. And instead, if we could tune into their heart, as I was saying before, listen to understand where they're coming from, and then join them in their feelings and validate their feelings. Now, they might be seeing it all wrong. Maybe they're making a mountain out of a molehill. There's time later to say, oh, I wonder if we could look at this differently. But you can't say that until you first join with them, so that it would look something like saying, wow, I'm so sorry. I can see how upset you are. This really was so hard on you. I'm so sorry you're hurting. Oh, it breaks my heart to see you this way. This is really hard. And then once they feel understood and heard, later you might be able to say something, if necessary, along the lines of, well, I wonder if maybe they didn't mean to hurt your feelings. Maybe they meant it this way. Maybe we're hearing it wrong or we're taking it the wrong way. But we can't add a word of correction until we first join with them where they are. And that's the empathy that children need.
In other words, empathy takes time.
Yes, for sure. We often rush to say, either tell our perspective or to correct or to teach, and you're exactly right. It's slowing down and it's taking time and it's being with them in their experience, whatever they're going with, and verbally letting them know that as well. Oh, I hear it. I can see this is so upsetting to you. Wow, this really upset you today, how hard this is. So giving them that feedback that we get it.
So much, Julie. I'll call you later, but thank you for being with us. Thank you so much. All right, we bless you. We'll pray for you. She's got to go see clients now. So. Thank you so much. All right, bless you. Thank you. All right.